Pakistan's economy is dying a slow and painful death. Its inflation rate is close to 30% and external debt runs hundreds of billions of dollars. Private employment in the country is a joke and foreign investors don't want to touch it with a barge pole. Now, India, on the other hand, is the fastest growing major economy in the world, already the fifth largest. India is racing to get to the number 3 spot before the end of the decade. It is the darling of FDIs and stock markets have been on a roll. Now, nothing new here, but when you look at the numbers which are flashing on your screen right now, you understand just how stark the difference between India and Pakistan is. Let's take it from the top. Let's look at the GDP numbers first. India's GDP is close to $3.7 trillion, likely to close the year at $4 trillion. Compare that with Pakistan, it is less than 1/10 of India's economy at just about $340 billion. Compare 3.7 trillion with 340 billion. That is the difference. Now look at the growth rate between the two economies, the two neighbors. India has been growing at a staggering 6.5% annualized growth rate. Compare this to Pakistan's 2% growth rate on a much smaller size of the economy. It tells you volumes. Now look at the foreign reserves, the holding of central banks in case of any contingency, any emergency. These are dollar value holdings that central banks both in India and Pakistan hold. India has got foreign exchange of more than $700 billion. Compare this to just about $8 billion that Pakistan holds in its central bank. Now, what happens to the lives of people? Inflation is something which has been eating into Pakistani citizens and nationals at 25% compared to less than 4% as the inflation rate for India. Now, no surprise, Pakistan lives on debt. Pakistan cannot sustain without external aid. And look at the debt to GDP ratio between Pakistan and India. India enjoying a debt to GDP ratio of under 20%. Pakistan, on the other hand, is as high as over 65%. And finally, we are discussing potential escalation between India and Pakistan. And look at the military budget allocation in both the countries. India is 10 times more equipped to go ahead and buy arms and ammunition as compared to Pakistan, with a budgetary allocation in India at $78.7 billion versus just about $7.6 billion in the case of Pakistan. Mithali Nikore, founder and chief economist, Nikore Associates, joins me this morning. Mithali, good morning. No comparison. People say this could be a war on economy, an economic war. But look at the numbers that we were just flashing on the screen. There is no comparison on the economic front between India and Pakistan.
No, Karthik, I don't think we can even compare or even think about comparing these countries. Actually, just as you were talking about the full-fledged GDP numbers and the debt to GDP ratio, I started looking at one statistic that we do often use to compare economies which are of such different sizes, which is the per capita income, right? Because the per capita income is an average number, and it shows us, how is the GDP divided between the population. And it's very interesting that in the 1960s and 1970s, the per capita income in India and Pakistan was actually very comparable. Not the overall size of the economy, but the per capita. And today, India's per capita income is 2,500 US dollars, whereas Pakistan's per capita income is 1,300 US dollars. So it's not only that India is a bigger economy overall, but also that, by per capita rate, like on average, despite the fact that we have nearly 1.4 billion, population, our per capita income is nearly double of Pakistan. So really, we really cannot compare the countries anymore.
Absolutely. What is it? Where is it that Pakistan has gone so badly wrong over the last 20 years or so, Mithali? I think, is it the focus of just making sure that the army continues to own every business, control every inch of land? Is that something which has led to this overall degeneration of Pakistan? And is there any hope of the poor country ever coming out of it?
So, Karthik, it's a very, very clear case of what we call an economics resource curse. It's not like Pakistan is not blessed with good natural resources or, very good ports. For example, the Karachi port, and, the Karachi port is a very important port in the overall international shipping industry. So it's not like they don't have, the similar engines of growth that even India enjoys, in some cases, or even Bangladesh enjoys. But the one change regimes, the one difference between countries which are doing well and countries which don't do well in development economics, we always call it the institutional leadership and the country's political leadership.
Right.
So in the last 20 years, we've seen that, Pakistan has had leaders, and, there's a lot of corruption, and there has not been that much of a focus on broad-based development, as opposed to, as you rightly said, exploitative, regimes coming in.
Right. So, had the army not been in charge in Pakistan, had a real democracy, not a flawed democracy, continued to be in Pakistan, do you think Pakistanis would have been much happier citizens today?
See, Karthik, I wouldn't even say it's about the army or the democracy. It's just about, even in an army regime, right, or even in a flawed democracy. I mean, we can look at the People's Republic of China and say, is that a full-fledged democracy? Of course not, right? So it's not that, these no these regimes are not conducive to economic growth, but the decisions that particularly that have been taken in Pakistan have always been around just exploiting the resources for the benefit of a few, and there has not been a focus on broad based development, on, developing, for example, more and more cities, on investing in urban infrastructure, on investing in transport and connectivity. And, we really need to see regimes which actually prioritize the well being of the people. And, here it has not been like that. Here it's been like a situation where the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, but nobody is questioning that layout. So even in an army regime or even in an authoritarian regime, as long as the authoritarian regime says, no, we are going to bring out policies for the benefit of the people, you can see growth. But here that was never actually done.
And I think I want to keep coming back to this, Mitali, and I feel and I seem to believe that the singular force behind this corruption, behind this political upheaval, and behind not caring for the citizens is the authoritarian regime, which is not even publicly stating that it is running the government, but it is running puppet government after puppet government. The fact is, where is the money in Pakistan? Pakistan continues to go to multinational financial institutions and rich countries with begging bowls year after year, quarter after quarter, because it's just unable to sustain its own day-to-day expenses, leave alone investing in infrastructure that you're talking about.
Absolutely, Karthik. And I'm also very surprised by this because, if you remember a few years ago, there was an economic crisis in a country like Greece, right? And the Eurozone countries actually gave Greece a bailout package, but that bailout package was accompanied by a number of very stringent conditions. And, the fact was that Greece had to cut down a lot of its fiscal spending in order to access that bailout package. However, in the case of Pakistan, we've observed that, the IMF has provided successive bailout packages over the, history of the country, over the economic history of the country. But the conditions which are often, coming in these bailout packages are not being fully implemented, and yet they continue to access these bailouts. So I think at the end of the day, somebody has to hold the financial authorities, the economic affairs ministry, the revenue departments in Pakistan responsible, and ask, why is it that these bailout conditions are not being met? And yet they are continuing to, access these bailouts.
Absolutely. So, for a country which is practically on the verge of bankruptcy, if not technically bankrupt already, the simple question that I think a lot of Indians and a lot of Pakistanis would be grappling with right now, Mitali, would be that if the two countries decide that escalation takes a military turn, can the Pakistani economy even afford a military skirmish, leave alone a war with India?
No, I mean, the war, a short war, of course, any country is prepared to be able to send their troops into war. And as we've seen, the Pakistani army is only one part of their defense apparatus. They have a number of other, sort of modus operandi when it comes to defense. And of course, I'm not an expert there, so I can't comment. But having said that, when we talk about the, sustainability of the economy, it will put immense pressure on both economies to go into war. And but at the same time, of course, India being a diversified economy, a larger country, just, having the pressure, the having the support of international organizations, and having the support of, countries like the US as well as Russia, going into this, makes India, of course, very very ready to sustain a longer term, defense campaign.
All right. I want to specifically talk to you, Mithali, about the forex reserves, and that is something that comes in handy every time there is an emergency. And it seems like Pakistan is definitely on the brink of emergency. Now, in case there was to be further defense escalation, military escalation, forex reserves in Pakistan are under $8 billion. Compare that to India's almost $700 billion in forex reserves. What does this tell you? The country doesn't have enough emergency reserves to go ahead and even feed its people, leave alone fighting a war.
Yeah, and absolutely, Karthik. And this again comes back to our entire discussion around caring for your own population, right? At the end of the day, when we look at the history of Pakistan and the way Pakistan has been governed, because there hasn't been a focus on poverty reduction, because there hasn't been a focus on reducing income inequalities, the decisions of whether to go into war or not are taken by the highest and the richest people of the country and the ones who control all the assets, and then they are sending a largely impoverished population into war, and that sort of creates a situation where the poor population becomes dependent on the defense services and becomes dependent on that money coming in. So in a way they are sustaining their defense campaign on poverty,
Right.
and that makes it very hard, of course, for any country to sustain. But this is the current situation in Pakistan.
Absolutely. Well, let's leave it at that for now. Mithali Nikore, always a pleasure having you here on News9. Thank you so much for joining us with your inputs this morning.